At 82 years old, Carl Dean, the longtime husband of country music icon Dolly Parton, has passed away. However, it's not just his passing that has the world talking. What truly shocked everyone were the unexpected tributes from celebrities no one would have anticipated, along with the deeply personal farewell Dolly gave, so raw and heartfelt that even those closest to her were left speechless. Stay with me, because what we're about to uncover will forever change the way you view Dolly Parton and her marriage. For decades, Dolly Parton and Carl Dean shared one of Hollywood's most private and mysterious love stories. While Dolly thrived under the bright lights of fame, Carl preferred a life of solitude, far removed from cameras and red carpets. The world only knew of him through Dolly's loving stories, where she described him as her anchor, her rock, and the love of her life. Now, at the age of 82, Carl Dean has passed, leaving behind more than just his devoted wife. He leaves a legacy of love, secrecy, and a romance that stood the test of time. In this story, we'll take you inside Dolly's intimate farewell to her husband, a tribute so profound it left even her closest friends in awe. We'll also reveal the surprising flood of celebrity tributes from stars no one expected and uncover the hidden aspects of Carl Dean's life that the public never knew. This isn't just a story of loss, it's a story of love, legacy, and a side of Dolly Parton the world has rarely seen. Throughout Dolly Parton's legendary career, Carl Dean remained like a shadow, always present, but rarely visible. Despite their more than 50 years of marriage, his extreme aversion to the public eye became the stuff of legend. Paparazzi could never capture him, interviewers never managed to lure him in, and fans could only speculate about the man who had won the heart of one of the world's most beloved entertainers. Then, on the morning of February 29, 2025, that quiet existence came to a gentle yet heartbreaking end. According to close family sources, Carl Dean passed away peacefully in the same Nashville home where he and Dolly built their life together. There were no dramatic hospital scenes, no media spectacle, just the quiet passing of a man who remained private, even in death. In the immediate hours after his passing, Dolly made no public statement. Friends close to the couple shared that the normally warm, humorous, and larger-than-life Dolly withdrew into herself, consumed by grief. One insider, a family friend of more than 40 years, described their home as having an almost sacred stillness, a place filled with decades of love, now learning to exist without him. But what happened next left everyone stunned. Carl's funeral was not arranged by a publicist or manager. Dolly Parton personally arranged every detail of Carl Dean's farewell, down to the smallest touch. Every flower, every melody, every tribute was hand-selected, not for spectacle, but as a final, deeply intimate gift from a devoted wife to her beloved husband. There were no cameras, no press releases, just a heartfelt goodbye, attended by family, lifelong friends, and a select few who had earned Carl's rare trust. This is exactly how Carl wanted it: private, personal, and away from the world's gaze. Yet, what no one expected was the flood of tributes from celebrities, revealing just how far Carl's quiet influence had reached. In an industry where celebrity funerals often become media spectacles, Dolly took a different approach, one that was a true reflection of her heart and the private love story she and Carl shared. But what made this tribute truly unforgettable wasn't just its beauty. It was the rare glimpse into a side of Dolly that few had ever seen. Stripped of rhinestones and rehearsed charm, she was raw, vulnerable, and unguarded. According to those closest to the family, in the days following Carl's passing, Dolly devoted herself entirely to planning his tribute. Not as a world-famous icon, but as a grieving wife saying farewell to the man who had been her silent strength through every triumph and hardship. Rather than a star-studded venue or a grand hall, the tribute took place in a small white chapel nestled on their Nashville property, a place Carl often retreated to for quiet prayer and reflection. The decor was simple yet deeply personal. Wildflowers, the same ones Carl had often picked for Dolly from their land, lined the aisle. Framed photographs spanning their 58-year marriage stood along the walls, some of them never before seen. Precious memories pulled from albums Carl had tucked away in his bedside drawer. There were no staged photo opportunities, no glossy media handouts. This was pure. This was personal. This was heartbreakingly sincere. But it was Dolly's tribute speech that left everyone in attendance speechless. For decades, she had built her public image on humor, grace, and an unshakable spirit. But in that moment, all of it fell away. With trembling hands clutching a handwritten letter, she spoke, not to the crowd, not to the cameras, but directly to Carl. She began by thanking him for loving her, the real her. Not the woman in wigs and sequins, not the performer adored by millions, but the woman who sang to him in the kitchen when no one was watching, the one who curled up beside him on the porch swing after long tours, the one who, despite all her fame, sometimes doubted herself. "You knew me before the world did," she said, her voice breaking, "and you loved me just the same." Then, in a moment that took everyone by surprise, Dolly pulled out a collection of love letters. Letters Carl had written to her over the years, ones that even her closest friends never knew existed. Some were scribbled on the backs of receipts, others on torn pages from notebooks. Some were simple notes left for her to find after long trips away from home. But each one revealed a side of Carl Dean that the world had never seen, a tender, poetic man whose love for Dolly ran deeper than words could ever capture. And then came the moment that would stay with everyone forever. Dolly ended her tribute not with one of her famous songs, but with something far more personal, a song she had written for Carl decades ago. A song never recorded, never performed, shared only between them. With nothing but her acoustic guitar and a trembling voice, she sang of love, loss, and devotion. The chapel fell silent, her voice the only sound echoing through the wooden rafters. As she reached the final verse, tears streamed down her face, and soon they streamed down the faces of everyone there. This wasn't the polished performer the world had come to know. This was Dolly Parton, the woman, the widow, the wife, laying her heart bare in the only way she knew how. Even those who had known the couple for decades admitted that, until that moment, they had never fully understood the depth of their love. Carl may have lived away from the spotlight, but in Dolly's heart, he was always the leading man. Though the funeral was intimate and private, the impact of Dolly's tribute reached far beyond the chapel walls. What happened next, no one saw coming. Some of the biggest names in entertainment began stepping forward, sharing their own personal stories of Carl Dean. Stories that would surprise even the most devoted Dolly Parton fans. Most assumed Carl had no real ties to the entertainment industry, choosing instead to remain in the background while Dolly took center stage. But after his passing, something remarkable happened. A flood of tributes poured in from some of the biggest names in music, television, and film, revealing a side of Carl few had ever known. First came the country music legends. The family of Loretta Lynn released a statement, sharing a little-known story. Back in the 1960s, long before bodyguards, personal assistants, and luxury tour buses, it was Carl Dean who drove Dolly and Loretta to their very first joint performance. More than just a husband, he was Dolly's quiet protector, the man who made sure both women got home safely when honky-tonks turned rowdy. Then came tributes from contemporary artists who revealed that Carl had been a quiet mentor, not in music, but in how to navigate fame without losing oneself. What the world had long misunderstood about Carl Dean was finally becoming clear. He wasn't just the man behind the legend, he was a legend in his own right. Everyone sensed the guy, even if no one saw him. A more complete image of Carl Dean emerged as the tales came in, not just as Dolly Parton's enigmatic husband, but also as a guy whose unassuming knowledge and kind heart had subtly influenced the lives of some of the most influential people in entertainment. Here's the startling bit, however. Rumors of secrets Carl had taken to his grave accompany these tributes. Tales of times when Carl had to intervene to shield Dolly from the worst aspects of celebrity. There were moments when he chose to keep his peace by shunning wealth. It even makes reference to the couple's own hardships, battles they concealed from the public. It became evident that Carl Dean was more than simply a mystery as the tributes went on. A man whose influence extended far beyond the boundaries of their Nashville home. He was a legend in his own right. One more homage that would permanently alter fans' perceptions of Carl Dean emerged just when everyone believed they understood the whole tale. One last homage to Carl Dean appeared just when everyone believed they had learned all there was to know about him, and it came from an unexpected place. This wasn't from a Hollywood celebrity, a country music icon, or even someone in Dolly's close social circle. It originated from a guy who had remained anonymous for many years and whose relationship to Carl Dean had been purposefully concealed from the public until recently. Walter Harris, a former music entrepreneur from Nashville who had discreetly departed the business in the late 1980s for unknown reasons, paid the homage. To the typical fan, he was a ghost, but to those who were steeped in the history of country music, his name had a faint familiarity. But when word spread about Walter's moving ode to Carl Dean, it became evident that his tale would change how people saw Dolly and Carl's marriage and the costs Carl paid to keep it together. In his own words, Walter acknowledged that Carl Dean was the reason he was free and alive. Walter described how Carl had rescued him from a perilous scenario involving the darker side of the music industry back in the 1970s in a rare interview with a local Tennessee magazine. Walter had been a talent scout at the time and had unwittingly been involved with influential people connected to organized crime. Those who believed that the thriving country music industry was a lucrative opportunity for money laundering. Despite being portrayed in the media as a straightforward man managing his asphalt company, Carl Dean had quietly earned a reputation in some quarters as someone who knew how to diffuse tense situations with nothing more than cool words and an unwavering sense of decency, not as a tough guy or an enforcer. Carl had the calm power to put a stop to arguments, but he wasn't the kind to start them. Walter said that after he had unwittingly signed contracts with harmful people, Carl had personally stepped in. Carl didn't do it for attention, wealth, or celebrity. He took this action because Carl believed that safeguarding Dolly's friends was an extension of safeguarding Dolly herself. And Walter had been a friend of Dolly's from her early years. That wasn't all, however. Carl's calm guardianship of Dolly went much beyond the occasional intervention, as Walter's homage demonstrated. At times, Carl himself made sure his wife was kept far away from certain unscrupulous people in the music business. When country music was at its peak in the 1970s and 1980s, young women, powerful males, producers, agents, and executives often preyed on young female artists, using their naivete and aspirations as a chance to take advantage of them. Even though Carl Dean disliked publicity and celebrity, he would be there when it counted. At certain industry gatherings, he would quietly and unobtrusively make his presence known, not as Dolly Parton's husband, but as a guy who made it plain that Dolly was not to be handled, manipulated, or forced. Potential predators were often deterred just by his presence. Here's the twist, however. Carl paid a personal price for becoming Dolly's quiet protector. As Walter's memorial revealed, Carl's protective demeanor was seen as a danger by influential men in the sector. Men who, out of concern that Dolly's spouse might be a danger, tried covertly to keep her out of certain agreements and possibilities. Some Dolly should follow their rules rather than hers. Walter claims that even though Carl was aware of this, he never felt remorse for the sacrifices. Carl realized that sometimes you had to be the shadow behind the light when you were married to a star, as Walter put it. Carl, however, was never only a shadow. He served as the house's structural support. Readers were shocked by the news that came at the conclusion of Walter's eulogy. For decades, Carl Dean had maintained a hidden book in which he recorded every transaction he helped Dolly avoid, every danger he subtly eliminated, and every instance in which his presence alone had altered the trajectory of her career. Walter said that this diary was not a means of blackmail or retaliation. It was a love letter that detailed all of Carl's actions taken to keep the lady he cared about safe. The sad part comes next. Walter claims that Dolly was unaware of the whole scope of Carl's sacrifices. She was aware of his protective nature, but she was unaware of the late-night phone conversations, the private altercations, or the personal offers Carl had declined in order to protect her. Walter said that this notebook was handed to a dependable family member, whom Carl knew would only divulge its contents after his passing, when the truth could no longer harm Dolly but only bring her glory. The journal's presence sparked a flurry of conjecture about what it may include and what it might really disclose about Carl and Dolly's actual relationship. They were more than simply spouses. They were partners in a silent act of sacrifice, love, and protection that lasted a lifetime. This is where it becomes much more intriguing, however. Carl left behind more secrets than just the notebook. More details about Carl's personal life surfaced in the days after his death. Pieces that would depict a guy who was considerably more heroic and nuanced than the world had ever known. Following Carl Dean's death, the world got a better look at the man Dolly Parton had known for over 60 years as the days stretched into weeks. Carl had long been the silent figure in Dolly's glistening shadow, someone who many believed had little interest in celebrity. However, the actual reality was much more profound, potent, and poignant than anybody could have ever guessed. Carl's notebook evolved into more than a compilation of tales. It became evidence of the invisible wars he waged, the bargains he turned down, and the predators he subtly drove out of Dolly's way. Carl Dean was much than simply a helpful spouse, as each page reminded us. He was the guy who ensured Dolly could shine fearlessly and serve as her quiet defender and guardian. However, Carl left behind more than simply his legacy. It endured in the principles Dolly currently upholds. In interviews after Carl's death, Dolly spoke up about the skills her husband had taught her, including the value of maintaining one's composure under pressure and the values of loyalty and privacy. Dolly's most poignant remarks were saved for the guy who never sought for applause, but always deserved a standing ovation. Despite the fact that condolences from other celebs, country luminaries, and fans worldwide were pouring in. She spoke of the calm times, the silent evenings on the porch, the laughter that filled their modest house, and the constant presence of a man who never once left her to face the storms of fame by herself.